Hey, what's up everyone? This is Snick back with another Royal Revolt 2 base review. Thanks for joining me. On this particular installment, we're going to be looking at David Kaw's base. That's Kaw.David in the game. He's ranked at number 363 right now on the global leaderboard, sitting on 3,138 trophies. And it's what I would consider to be an upper mid-level to borderline high-level base here. And David is using one of the most common base layouts in the game, but at mid-level gameplay, it's probably also one of the most effective, and that is the paperclip base design. As we look here at the mini map for David's base, that probably jumps right off the page at you. It's pretty self-evident, but I will get into the structure of the paperclip here in a moment, some of the key defensive benefits that it offers, some of the drawbacks as well, and what David has done to optimize the layout. I'll go ahead and start with the actual wave composition that David has. So the troops that he is deploying from his castle gate to defend his base, and then the defensive structures. So David is using a mix of melee and range DPS troops, primarily range DPS, but I do like that he is still using paladins, and that the paladins are out front and are the primary troop that he's using. Second up, he has pyromancers, and between paladins and pyromancers, they both max out at 2,870 hit points. So David probably doesn't have, he may have max paladins, probably not max pyromancers yet, but they are, nonetheless, they are the best tank unit types or troop types in the game. They are the strongest by hit points, for sure. And so it's good to see that they're there, because that makes the waves that David is using to defend the base more robust and more time consuming to bring down. And then next to pyromancers, so third in line there, I see frosters, and it looks like there's probably more than one froster per wave that David's using. Don't know that that's necessary per se, but it is great to see the frosters there because of the slow effect that they deal out to the raiding party and to the hero. And then finally mortars, kind of bringing up the rear there. I do note that there aren't any R-blasters in David's wave composition, and I'm not sure if that's just because they're not maybe they're lagging behind a little bit in David's upgrade progression or in David's upgrade cycle. But I will say right off the bat, David, that probably is something that you'll want to reconsider. Is not having any R-blasters in your wave composition, because they are a great addition to your overall range DPS, especially with the base design that you're currently using. And as you would expect from a high mid-level to upper level base, we do have firebolt towers, blockades, and skull towers. I like to see that he does have one spike pad, which is the red square that's on the mini map there. It's just one. I actually have one myself, but the number of blockades and or barricades is in total, when your castle gate is maxed out, is 14, and that actually ends up being one blockade or barricade too many to space out effectively and not cluster up. And so the use of a spike pad to deal out a little bit additional piercing damage is an interesting idea, and is something that I don't see many people doing. I know Master E is doing that now. I do it myself, and then it looks like David's doing it here as well. So that's something that others who are watching this might want to consider experimenting with. Just add a little bit additional DPS, but then at the same time not clustering up your blockades or barricades, because when you cluster them up too tightly, it really just kind of renders them moot, or it negates the benefit of having them in the first place. And then finally, it looks like David has a barricade or a blockade, which is probably a holdover from earlier level gameplay that I imagine he's winnowing out as he levels up his blockades. So looking at the map itself, so looking at the paperclip in particular, we're going to do a little bit of a teardown to it here to see the pros and the cons, things that David's doing right, and then maybe some areas for improvement. Then we'll go into the raid itself and check things out. So the design of the paperclip is such that you have a long initial approach, so a long straight path that goes up almost all the way to the castle gate rectangle at the very top. And conveniently, David's spike pad here, again, that's the red square, is placed right at the top of this this initial path, and that's where the key defensive element, or the key defensive benefit to the paperclip design is, which is this tight choke point that's created here by the 180 degree or hairpin turn, where that initial path turns over and then goes back down in kind of a straight southerly fashion before it bottoms out and then swings around in another 180 degree turn for the final approach that goes up and around to the castle gate itself. So there's really three main areas here that kind of break down and point out the benefits and the drawbacks to the paperclip. The first, as I just mentioned, the key benefit is the choke point that's created right where the spike pad or the red square is here on the mini map. So what we have here is this 180 degree or hairpin turn, which creates a little bit of a choke point in and of itself, because it's a complete, change in orientation for the direction of the raid. Up and to the left of that, so the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th defensive tower that's on the left side there is actually untouchable or unassailable for the most part at this point, and that is placed there. It's actually a skull tower in David's case, and I can tell you that because I've raided and evaluated his base before. But that skull tower is placed there to provide a kind of suppressing fire, which is designed to mow down the hero and more effectively the raiding party that's attempting to advance and get through the choke point. So that's a pretty typical defensive tactic or a defensive component of most mid to high level bases. You see that all over Royal Revolt 2. The other kind of standard base layout design that uses that to really beneficial effect is the Clover base, which is actually something that I use. So it's not unusual to see that. The only troop types that have any hope of actually bringing down that tower before the hero eventually has to go all the way out and around and get around to it and destroy it himself are the cannon and the R-blaster. And the reason for that is because their range is such that if the targeting AI of the cannons or the R-blasters locks onto that tower, it will attack that tower and potentially bring that tower down. But pyromancers, mortars, and certainly archers are unable to kind of cross that gap or bridge that gap to attack that tower. So that is the benefit of having the tower there to provide that suppressing fire. In addition to that, right across from the red square, where that 90-degree turn is right before you get into the castle gate rectangle itself, is where the ranged troops or the ranged DPS that are part of David's waves will come out of his base and will provide kind of complementing suppressing fire along with the firebolt tower to prevent the raiding party from getting through the choke point. The benefit of having it where it's at, and this is probably the best use of the choke point with the paperclip. It could be down a little bit further, but I like the way that David's done it, because as the raiding party's range DPS, whether it's pyromancers, R-blasters, cannons, mortars, etc., comes up and attacks and ultimately, deals damage to and kills off the range DPS that's defending the choke point that is coming out of the gate. Because it's so close to the gate, the range DPS is constantly being replenished. And so there aren't long gaps or long spaces where you're waiting for the waves to kind of get down and around to the choke point. And so there's a constant stream of range DPS coming out of the gate itself. And so that's definitely the best placement of the choke point and the hairpin turn. And so that is, as I had said, the key signature or the key benefit to the paperclip design. Now, and getting further into the base design itself, we start to get a little bit into some of the drawbacks of the paperclip. One of which I'll note is that in the second parallel path after that first hairpin turn, here David doesn't have any blockades or barricades whatsoever. So it's a completely uninhibited or unimpeded advance all the way down through there to the very bottom where the second 180-degree turn starts. Now, in previous videos, I've come out as kind of an advocate of this, and the reason for it is because if blockades or barricades were placed in that second parallel path, the Blade Storm or the Sonic Blast that's used to take the blockades out in the initial path would also kind of overlap and hit those blockades or barricades as well, effectively, rendering them pointless or rendering them moot. And so I'm glad to see that David has decided to use the blockades or the barricades that he has out here to better effect elsewhere. And in this case, he's put them all the way over in the far right portion of the path, which we'll get to here in just a second. However, I will say that because that does create a completely uninhibited or unimpeded advance down through that portion of the base, the 5 towers that are in this middle strip, or this middle kind of one tile column down the middle of the paperclip, can be attacked by a Blade Storm or a Sonic Blast without any kind of interruption whatsoever created by barriers throughout the path. Now, in mid-level gameplay, it's not necessarily that big of a deal, and not necessarily even in high-level gameplay. But the issue is if those towers don't keep pace with the upgrade kind of progressions that people that are at level with you, David, are going through with Sonic Blast and Blade Storm, then it's going to be very easy for somebody to come along and kind of mow right through and completely tear down those towers, maybe taking out 2, 3, even 4 in one fell swoop, which deals an extraordinarily high amount of damage to your base. So that's something that you might want to think about or rework or continue to assess as you continue to progress and people that are at level continue to attack you. And then lastly, we have a stair step or kind of staggered approach that goes through the last path or the final approach that goes up to the castle gate itself. Everything's very clustered here and very, very tight together, and so that can seem great and it is helpful for just the cumulative damage that it deals out, but it can also be a hindrance as well, and can also be a negative for the for the base design, because all of the towers that are in the middle strip have been taken out by the time the raider gets around to this final path that goes up in a northerly direction toward the gate. And it is also possible to attack towers through blockades or through barricades, as we'll see in a moment. So having things clustered up here can be a little bit of a detriment as well. Getting into the base itself, we'll go ahead and raid through here. And what I'm going to first do is bring out some pyromancers and our blasters, and then as I get up toward the choke point itself, I'm going to actually bring out a couple of cannons. The reason I'm going to bring out cannons is I'm going to attempt to see if we can get across the gap that's created by this firebolt tower that's on the other side of the choke point there. And you'll notice as I'm going through, and I went through a little bit fast, but even with the wave that's coming, we have a Froster and we have a Pyromancer, so not a lot of ranged DPS there. I would like to see more greeting the Raider as they're coming through. Now let's check out this middle path. As you'll see, 1, 2. Okay, so I took out 2. I think in the past I've taken out 3 there. So maybe not the best example of what's possible there. But as I had said earlier, and that's actually with a max level Sonic Blast. So that's something, David, that you'll want to continue to consider or monitor carefully as you get into higher level gameplay, because people with max level Blade Storm and Sonic Blast will be able to go through there relatively easily. So now getting into this clustered area over here on the right side, you will notice that I'm able to attack the Skull Tower through the blockade. You cannot attack a Firebolt Tower with Blade Storm or Sonic Blast through a blockade, but you can do it to a Firebolt Tower. So that's something to keep in mind when you're clustering things up here, and when you're lining up towers adjacent to blockades. A lot of times it's better to actually do it with, it's better to place Firebolt Towers immediately after blockades as opposed to Skull Towers. Not always possible, of course, but it can be helpful to do that. Okay, so finally, coming up to the base itself, you will note that that Firebolt Tower was not taken down, so I spawned 3 or 4 level 6 cannons there, and it still wasn't able to effectively take that out. So that's a vindication of the design. So David, coming up here on a victory, very good design, love the paperclip, you did a great job with it, probably the best paperclip design that's out there. A few things that I would maybe modify or change around. Let me know if you have any questions regarding that. Otherwise, if you have any general ideas, leave them in the comments. Thanks.